Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session about digital inclusion. I'm delighted to have a range of participants joining me this morning. So I'd like to introduce Rob Pavey, who's the head teacher at Cheney School, Charlie Eggleston, who's the deputy head teacher at Bayards Hill Primary School, Pat Coomer-Wood, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Citizen Advice North Oxfordshire and South Northamptonshire, John Dennis, who's the IT manager at Aspire Oxford, and John Keston Hall, who's the project officer for Devices for Schools at the University of Oxford. And I'm Olwen Linton-Smythe, and I'm here from Oxfordshire Community Foundation. Welcome to this session. We had a session a while ago talking about what digital exclusion was, and part of the importance of the session today is to make sure that everybody's aware that this isn't something that's just going to go away when COVID has passed. COVID has increased the awareness of the issues with all the talk about homeschooling and some of the other issues that have come to light. But our chance today is to look a little bit more at the detail of some of the impact that being excluded has on people of all ages and what we can do working together to help solve some of those issues. So we're going to talk to the different participants about their experiences or the experiences of their school pupils. So I'm going to pass over to Rob in the first instance to give his experiences of this issue. Both Rob and Charlie have been extremely proactive during the pandemic, finding solutions for their pupils. And it would be great to hear a bit more about that. So we'll start with you, Rob, if we could.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for all the efforts that people are making to tackle this issue. Obviously, we've discovered that during the course of the pandemic that there are a certain number of our students who haven't been able to engage easily online. We've fixed that, we've plugged that hole, but it is only a case of plugging the hole. As we move forwards, there are lots of things which we're doing, which we've done over the pandemic, which we're going to keep doing. So the use of Google Classroom, a certain amount of blended learning, the use of digital platforms to make access to information and learning and revision easier in the future. But to do that, all of our children need to have reliable access to the internet all the way through. So we are planning as part of our core budget from now and for forever to provide a very, very heavily subsidized Chromebook to all of our free school meals children. And the assistance of the community in plugging gaps where there are children who don't quite fit into free school meals but still struggle at home with the access and with the financing is going to be incredibly important, not just now, but forever, in fact.
Okay, thanks, Rob. That's really useful perspective. Thank you. And Charlie, some people might think that for younger children it's not as important, but I think you'd probably beg to differ on that.
Yeah, I will. I definitely would say how important it is for us. Just to give you some sort of context, in January when this lockdown started, only 33% of our pupils were able to access any kind of education online. But my statistics were based on that's any kind of access. One of the problems that started to become really clear is, of course, that these children may have been trying to access Google Classroom or some kind of digital platform, perhaps on their parents' mobile phone or a tablet, which wasn't quite up to speed in terms of enabling them to access Google Classroom to the best of its abilities. And another issue which really became apparent is that of course siblings in the same household may needed to have been sharing the device. So even though the percentage of a third of children were actually able to access the internet, it didn't necessarily mean that children were able to access their learning, because we needed to get more devices into households where they had siblings all trying to fight for that device, and also with parents working online, that was also the case. So going forwards, of course, this has really highlighted how many children don't have access for when we're setting homework and when we're setting sort of studies at home, and it's stopping the children from able to access the learning experiences that everybody else is able to access. We did manage, what worked well is we did manage to get some private donors, one of them being Magdalen College School, which was able to, as Rob said, plug the gap for now. And we did manage to get some support from the government, albeit a little bit too late, if I'm honest. But then, of course, once we got some of these devices out, the high quality internet access was also a problem. So going forwards, being able to have some kind of community support where people can get hold of a device which enables the pupils to access that learning, it would be really, really important.
Thanks, Charlie. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Rob? Anything from your perspective about that ongoing need with helping with homework and that kind of aspect? Anything about the impact that this has more broadly, perhaps on achievement? Is there any insight you can give into that?
Well, I think Charlie put it extremely well. These issues of access and fairness. I mean, the recent Education Select Committee report highlights it, that this is yet another barrier which entrenches disadvantage, and it's a barrier that we can, in the 21st century, we can overcome. But increasingly, children that aren't able to access computers, Google Classroom, the internet, are going to find themselves disadvantaged not only in school, because that's increasingly the way that we're going to be working, but there aren't a lot of jobs out there these days that don't involve use of these sort of platforms. So you are yet again putting already disadvantaged communities at further disadvantage if we don't manage to plug this gap. So what Charlie said is entirely correct, and it's also have families with multiple siblings, all of whom need to have a similar access, as well as parents, frankly. So it is not insuperable. That's the good thing, because we have we have a lot of support from the community, and we are fortunate to live in 21st century Britain. So this can and really needs to be fixed.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're having this conversation today, is if we bring the right people together, it is something that can be fixed, but it's not something that can be fixed, I think, in isolation. And that's why the importance of partnership working across different organizations and businesses, if we work together to tackle it as a long-term issue, and understanding that it's not something that can be fixed overnight, but that needs to be tackled in a proactive way in order to reduce, this inequality that's evident. Now, obviously, we've talked about school children. I'm going to move on to Pat now, who will talk a bit about the impact on other ages of people, whether that's people looking for jobs or older people who, for various reasons, haven't been able to get online. And we know that the barriers to getting online are not just about devices. It can be about connectivity, as Charlie mentioned earlier as well, or it can be about training. So, Pat, from your perspective, why is this issue so important, even when we come out of COVID?
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to speak about this. And you might wonder why Citizens Advice is interested in sort of digital exclusion, but certainly one of the things we encountered at the start of lockdown was that we predominantly offered all of our services face-to-face, and we do advice services, social prescribing services, which are about addressing loneliness and isolation, so with a bit of a health focus as well as social problems. And suddenly we couldn't have people in the building face-to-face, so we couldn't operate in our usual way. And that made us realize that we had to shift everything onto digital, using telephone and other digital means to support people. And that meant that there were a significant number of people who needed help who couldn't access it. And this made us aware of the absolute importance of addressing the digital divide. Now, this tends to fall into two groups. The one group is older people who may be able to afford devices and even may be able to afford internet, but lack skills to use them, and certainly don't have the confidence to do it on their own. And there's a big jump between getting a device and starting to use it, and then getting training to use that device. So what we're looking at doing is how we can support people just to go online safely, to do the things they need to do, rather than to try and learn how to use a computer. And this is about addressing loneliness, social isolation, which is an enormous problem and causing tremendous health disadvantage to older people. And we are seeing sort of an increase in the frailty of people, both from the point of view of physical frailty as well as mental health issues because of the isolation over lockdown. So this is a really critical and important thing to do. The other group are people who may have the skills, or maybe not have the skills, but also cannot access devices, cannot afford internet connection or data. So it could be that they can use it, but it's of no value to them if they can't afford to get online. And interestingly enough, I was on the radio, Oxford last week, just talking about the fact that high street banks are all closing their branches. And the expectation is that people will do online banking, which for those people, it means that they're going to be excluded from an everyday ordinary function, which is about doing your banking, and are going to either need a third party to assist them or have to find another way to do that. And I know a lot of banks are reaching out and trying to help people and delivering cash and, doing certain things, but the likelihood of that continuing indefinitely is probably quite low. So it's really important for us to make sure that older people are given the skills and the confidence to do the things they need to do online in a safe way, but also that people who are disadvantaged and cannot access internet or data or devices have some way of being able to do that. So as has been said already, they're able to participate in employment or even to manage benefits or pay their council tax, all of which is online.
Absolutely. And I think this move to everything, the default being that everything is happening online, is very important, which is why I think now we talk about digital inclusion being a need, not a luxury. It used to be something that you wanted to be able to do and it was nice to have, whereas now it really has moved, and the pandemic has hastened that. I think there were already a lot of things that were moving online. So John, John Dennis, do you want to say a little bit about what we're doing through the hub? So this project, or initiative, I should more rightly say, called Getting Oxfordshire Online has been set up to try to bring together some of the support that's available for people, whatever the reasons for their lack of access. So John, do you want to say a little bit about the hub at Aspire?
Sure. So let me just give everyone a little bit of background on Aspire first. So we're an Oxford-based charity. We provide specialist and person-centred employment and housing support to people facing complex challenges, ranging from homelessness and offending histories to substance misuse or mental health difficulties. Many of our beneficiaries now come from marginalised backgrounds that make this support all the more important, including refugees, ex-military personnel, and young people not in education, training, or employment. Now, while we've always been very aware that many of our clients suffer from digital exclusion and have taken steps in the past to tackle it, the onset of the pandemic has really focused our attention on the issue. Like Pat, in the same way as Pat, it's really massively changed the way we reach and work with the people we are supporting. For example, we used to work with people in a very hands-on way through work experience and training with our garden and property maintenance teams from our social enterprise and other things like that. And of course, the pandemic's changed everything. I'm very proud of the speed with which our organisation has pivoted to supporting people through digital means. So using our in-house expertise, we were quickly able to start obtaining laptops and other digital devices, both through private donations and bulk purchases from refurbishers. That allowed us to reach and benefit the maximum number of people using our finite funds. But unfortunately, our funds are finite and there are only so many devices we can buy. We know that we could reach many more people if we had a steady source of donated devices that we could refurbish and distribute to those in need. And that's where this project, Getting Oxfordshire Online, comes in. So, and a little bit of background on myself. I've got about 20 years experience working as a systems administrator and network security consultant, mainly in telecoms and finance. So I'm acutely aware of the very well-placed anxiety around data security and confidentiality, particularly as it applies to used devices of the kind that we're looking for. So we've put a lot of thought into how we can reassure potential donors that any data left on those donated devices will remain confidential. And that's been our big focus when setting up our hubs. So we're essentially offering two levels of assurance to donors. as an absolute baseline, and this applies to both private individual donations and to corporate donors, we will be securely wiping the hard drives in any donated devices using the same 3-pass technique that's been approved by both the UK government and the US Department of Defense for non-top secret data. And we believe that this provides permanent and non-reversible destruction of any data that might be left on those devices. However, we're also aware that some potential donors have data protection requirements so stringent that it would never be possible to allow that data to leave the organisation under any circumstances, and that no assurances around confidentiality that we can offer would change that. So we would instead ask those organisations to consider donating us devices with the hard drives removed. That would hopefully remove any concern around data confidentiality and still provide us with a device that can be reused for a relatively low cost. So I would urge any potential donors in this position to please consider this option.
Thanks, John. That's really useful summary of what's happening there. And we should say that there's also a hub out at Didcot that Sophia are running, and we hope to have one set up and running in Bicester soon. And just to echo what John has said, we can take devices at whatever stage. We can either do the full wipe, or we can accept them already wiped if they've been done in a different means, and then just configure them for whatever end beneficiary that they're going for. So if they're going to schools, we might turn them into Chromebooks. If they're going to a different kind of end beneficiary, we would make them suitable for whoever we're giving them to. So whatever stage they're at, we can have, which seems like a good point to link into John Kestenhall from Oxford University, who has been very proactive in this area. And would you like to give your view of this as an organisation who is trying to help from a business perspective?
Yes, the Oxford University has a charitable obligation to support education and educational charities, and it also generates a lot of redundant technical equipment that it no longer needs, but has still got quite a lot of use left in it. We launched devices for schools in February this year as a means for university members to donate their old devices to charity, and we formed a partnership with Oxfordshire Community Foundation with the idea that the university devices that are donated should benefit primarily educational charities and schools around Oxfordshire. Phase 1 was launched in February, and that was to provide advice on preparing a device for donation from individuals. So in other words, how to erase their data safely prior to donation. And phase 2, which was the much more complicated part of the process, was to find a third party that could collect devices from university departments and from colleges, securely process them, look after the data while it was in their care, securely erase the data, and then to liaise with educational charities and to donate the devices. So they've been talking directly to Olwyn at OCF to work out the practicalities of how that's going to work. The scheme is going to be funded, the third party donations are going to be funded by the sale of equipment which falls outside the scheme, which still has a commercial value. So in other words, they sell off the things that they're not going to donate, and thus and that supports the costs associated with the devices that are donated. So the whole scheme should be cost neutral, and is based on the scheme that was recommended to us by Oxford University Press, which has been running with them for some time. I'd like to say also it's very interesting to hear from the schools and from Aspire, because I've been talking to Olwyn about this, but you don't get a perspective working from the donors end of how important this is at the sharp end for the organisations that actually need these devices, and how urgent this is, and the importance of getting that flow of donated devices running.
Thanks, John. Yes, and I think we've really appreciated your proactiveness in doing this and being involved, and we're very much hoping that your example will be one that other businesses will follow when they see that it is possible and the benefits that can be had from it. And absolutely hearing from Charlie and from John and from Rob about the real impact that this has. It's we can talk about it, but as you say, when you're a step removed from it, you don't necessarily see the real benefit that it has and the real impact it has day to day. So the aim, as I say, of Getting Oxfordshire Online is to bring together this support. And crucially, we need the voices of those who are working with the school children, with the people who are seeking work, with the older people who can't get online, so we really understand their needs. And then that we can provide whatever it is that will help them, whether that is the device or the training, to enable them to really get that access they want. Because we estimate that there are up to 40,000 people in Oxfordshire who are still not online. And that obviously has been, it has been improved a little bit with the pandemic, because there's been more of an effort made to try to address this issue, but it has been largely reactive. And I think what we're all trying to do here, and we're going to continue doing over the next few years, is to be proactive about how we do this. But it's about doing that in a way where we can work together from all our different angles to make that support as appropriate as it can be to the needs of the people we're trying to reach, and in a way that other people will get involved as well, because it's not just us. We need to make sure that other people in the business community are following Oxford University's example, and other training organisations and others who can offer the different parts of support are getting involved in the ways that they can. So is there anything anyone would like to add specifically that we haven't covered? Would you think we've got to do this if nothing else? So come back to you, perhaps, Charlie, from a school's perspective, is there anything else that you'd particularly like to see as we try to tackle this problem going forward?
I think I've really appreciated as a school, the efforts that lots of individuals have made. And I know in a meeting with yourself once before, when we discussed that sometimes it's a case of not really understanding how tricky some of it is. We've talked a little bit about security, and obviously in a primary school it's extremely important. And we did manage to get some donations of some tablets from Amazon, but we're unable to manage them in a safe way for our pupils. So sometimes it's a case of just making people aware of what the issues really are. But it sounds like with everybody that's spoken this morning, it sounds like we're bringing people together and getting a good team together. These issues can easily be overcome. So it sounds quite positive from my end. But yeah, it's just a case of understanding what it might look like for the different stakeholders. Obviously for children, security online is really, really important, but also a case of I think one of the things for me that stands out is within our community is this thing of ICT capability, and in the past ICT would have been taught in the curriculum as sort of a standalone subject, whereas now it's all focused on computing. And in most families, pupils learn how to use a Chromebook or a laptop or a digital device now very, very easily because they have exposure to it. And what this is exposed with our demographic is the fact that children may be able to use the touch screen, but they actually don't have the ICT capability to use a Chromebook or a laptop. It's just an extra little thing that I was thinking as everybody was talking.
Yeah, it's interesting that kind of insight that you wouldn't even think about is that level of detail. And at least, as you say, as a child now, you get some exposure at school to this. Whereas when you think about older people, I mean, I like to think I'm not that old, but even when I was at school, this wasn't something that you learned routinely. And I think if you've never had the cause to do it as you get older, that fear, because I think there's being safe online is an issue whatever age you are for different reasons, and I think making sure that training and support is there. We're just not giving the device and then just letting people get on with it, I think is really important. And I think unfortunately we're almost out of time for this session, so I think we're going to have to wrap it up. Any quick other thoughts from anyone before we wrap up the session? Pat?
If I could just quickly jump in and say, I think the important thing is to recognise that gap for many people between not knowing or not having the skills and getting training, because sometimes there might just be a situation where a bit like the remote control. You tape it up and only leave the buttons that are necessary for someone who may not be able to go online or ever really get to understand ICT in the way that a younger person will need to for their employment and so forth. So particularly for older people, just being able to use a device that it's set up, it's got the app on it, and if it stops working, they've got someone they can call to say it's not working, help. Because for some people, ICT skills are going to be limited to that. But the safety online is so critical, because for so many people, the risk is enormous about being scammed or being taken advantage of online. And I think that's what we really have to make sure we protect, are the vulnerable people who will be, victims to that sort of nefarious sort of opportunity that people might take online.
Yes, thanks, Pat. It's a very good point. And so from where we are now, we're in the early stages of this initiative of Getting Oxfordshire Online. There's a lot that we would love to do, but in order to do that, obviously, we do need support from everyone to do that. And the first sort of call to action at this stage really is around getting more devices donated to us. So following the example of the University of Oxford with their pipeline of donations, I'm sure John Keston Hull would be only too happy to talk to anyone or give information if they think they'd like to donate, but they're not sure how to go about it. And then John Dennis at Aspire will be only too delighted to take your devices from you once you've got to the point that you're happy to give them. So if you've got devices that you think you could donate, then please do consider giving them to us. As I say, there are hubs set up. If you're in Oxford, then the Aspire hub is the place to go, or there's one, as I say, out at Didcot as well. Any device that you can give, as long as it's not too ancient, will be appreciated, and it also does its bit for the environment by recycling it. So that's an added benefit to consider as well. So please do consider giving devices. If you don't want to give a device, or you haven't got a device to give, you could also make a donation to the initiative, and there's a page to allow you to do that on the Oxfordshire Community Foundation website as well. So I think it just remains for me to thank all of you for joining the session today. Rob had to leave to attend to something at school. This is the joy of being a head teacher. He's had to go to a live meeting there at school, but I'd like to thank Rob and Charlie for making the time out of their days at school, and to the two Johns and Pat for all their various inputs into this session. It's been great to have you all here, and thank you very much to B4 for hosting us, and thank you everyone who's been watching the session. Many thanks.